Good afternoon and welcome to our 4th program of SNED Talks. We so much appreciate each one of you who came to support our Adult Ed Committee. How many have been before, by the way? Hey, cool. That's the great thing. Once we can get you here, you seem to want to come back. My name's Priscilla Wilson. I'm on the Adult Ed Committee here at SNCA. And I'd like to recognize the other committee members. Barbara Williams, they won't stand up, but I have to say their names right. Barbara Williams, Tony Reed, and Ann Gillespie. They are the most fantastic committee ever. As always, I would like to invoke the spirit of Isabel Lumsden Couch, who would so love SNED Talks. She was a great educator and, as many of you know, a founder, one of the great founders of this organization. I also want to thank some other people. Linda Harding, without whom we could not do this. She does light, sound, and the images. Roger Williams. If you want to, you can clap for all of them at the end. Roger Williams, alias SauteeLive.com, who has recorded each of our programs on video or cyberspace, whatever. Sam Williams, who created our wonderful logo and did the layout for all our promotional materials. David Greer, who gave special help this time with Linda Crittenden's photographs, which you will really, really enjoy. Also, Dee Dee Vogt, who is our coordinator with the hierarchy here at SNCA. So thank you to all those people. And also would like to give a special thanks for our speakers today. It's really a lot of hard work to prepare for this, but their work will pay off in your enjoyment, I'm sure. A few housekeeping things. There are exit signs at the back and side here of the auditorium. Restrooms at each end of the hall. I think every person here knows all this, but we're supposed to say it. Would like to ask you to please turn off your cell phones. Well, I'm glad I said that because I see a few people doing it. Our theme for today is Connecting, Communications in the Cosmos. Each of our 3 speakers will talk for about 15 minutes, and after which we'll have time for questions and then refreshments after, so that you can meet the speakers and ask more questions. First up is Abigail Hosford Cutchshaw to talk about the art and science of smiling. Well, this is my reminder to smile. Abigail is known to White County news readers as Lulabelle, our popular advice columnist. But Abigail is and does so much more. She stays busy pursuing her master's degree in special ed, working at a couple of jobs, volunteering, and being a mother. Abigail lives in Cleveland with her husband Adrian and 3 of their 5 children.
Thank you. I'm kind of short, so even with heels, what can I do? I am a lucky girl. I have 2 smart and beautiful sisters, one older, one younger. I'm the middle child who is happily sandwiched between all that love and friendship and secret language that sisters share. I am the younger sister of Jennifer, who was the coolest girl in high school. My social status was elevated simply because we shared the same weird last name. She listened to the coolest music and wore the coolest clothes and was strikingly very tall and pretty, and she still is. And when I was in middle school, Jennifer was my chauffeur to school. While all my schoolmates were dropped off in station wagons or the big yellow cheese, I showed up in my sister's black bomb. And it looked just like that. Windows rolled down with the Sex Pistols blaring out the windows. And all the cool 7th and 8th grade boys waited for me every morning at the drop-off, but they were just hoping to get a glimpse of Jennifer. There came a time when the typical troubles of middle school broke my sweet little pubescent heart. And on one particularly depressing morning, my sister told me we were going to do an experiment. She had recently consulted the highly regarded, very scientific journal known as 17 Magazine. And it said, like, if you practice like smiling for 10 minutes, it can make you happy, even when you're feeling blue. Also, it can fight wrinkles, which of course is what all the 12 and 16-year-old girls were concerned about in 1986. But guess what? It actually worked. We got into the habit of smiling really big, obnoxious smiles all the way to school for the rest of the school year. And we had smiling contests. And we laughed because it was funny. You try smiling with someone and see what happens. Go ahead and try it. Smile with your neighbor. I'll wait. Social psychologist Amy Cuddy did some pretty well-known research on body language. She studied power body language. She wanted to know if you practice a more confident body posture, kind of like this, for example. And let me just tell you, if I look like that, I'd be really confident. But she wanted to know if you just practice that kind of power posture, if you felt more confident, would you perhaps become more successful? Her research posed the questions: minds change our bodies, but can our bodies change our minds? Can you actually fake it until you make it? Well, we read body language all day long. In fact, most of the social language information that we interpret comes to us non-verbally. The way people carry their bodies can tell us if they're shy or confident or overly confident. And people's postures can tell us if they are relaxed or nervous. And we can tell how interested people are in what we are saying by the direction of their bodies. And if you ever really want to know, just look at the person's feet. Are they pointing towards you? Are they pointing towards you, or are they pointing away from you? And I'm looking at some feet, and I see all seem to be pointing this way, so that's good. And the next time you shake someone's hand, notice the position of your hand. Did you grab the other person's hand over the top and come down for the grab like that? Or did you offer your hand like this, and you just want them to hold it like a little fish or something? Or did you come in straight, grasping the other person's hand in a basically parallel fashion like that? Yeah. That can tell you a lot about whether or not you feel like a leader, a follower, or if you view you and the person with whom you're shaking hands as an equal partner. And you can, of course, tell a lot about a person in their eyes. Do they look away? Do they look to the left upper corner of a room like this while they're talking to you? That may mean that they're good liars. And they use their imagination to figure out what to say next. Or maybe they look down while they're talking to you, as if they're searching for a lost contact lens. And that may mean that they feel guilty about something and they're sorry about it. Or do they address you while gazing into your eyes with small breaks here and there? That means they're honest and have good manners. But this is also a cultural idea. In some cultures, it's rude to make eye contact. And people with certain disabilities, like autism, find it too intense to make eye contact. So keep those things in mind. What about people who close their eyes when they're smiling like this? That can be an indication of pure bliss. I'm so happy to be here today. Or it could be a way for us to sort through our memory files to conjure up an image to help us remember something. Let's look at a few examples. That's my son, Nicholas. Isn't he cute? What is his body communicating in this picture? Look at his eyes, the way he's sitting in the chair. Does he look at ease and comfortable? Do you think he's happy? Yes. See, you're really good at this. He was truly happy in this picture. The next slide is my daughter, Molly. What is her body communicating in this picture? See how she cut her eyes at the photographer? Well, the photographer was me. And we were at the sunflower farm, and Molly is really scared of bees, and I had accidentally just given her a big dose of exposure therapy in the field of honeybees. And when we reunited for this photo, she really was seriously angry with me. Reading body language is easy. It comes very naturally to us. It's in our DNA. Charles Darwin is the father of the study of body language. In the 19th century, this was a completely foreign concept because people in this period typically were more reserved. But Darwin was always interested in finding connections between humans and animals and noted several similarities in the way humans and animals express their emotions through facial expressions. And Phyllis Diller once said, "A smile is a curve that can set everything straight." And it seems to be true, even if only temporarily. That's because research shows that a smiling expression sends feedback from your face to your left frontal cortex, which in turn triggers the release of the neurotransmitters serotonin, endorphins, and dopamine into your brain. And these happiness chemicals begin to improve your mood and lower your blood pressure. Also good news, smiling lowers the cortisol level in your blood. Cortisol is the hormone that we release when we are stressed. It's a great hormone. It gives us the ability to fight or flight. If we are ever chased by a bear, or if we ever need to lift a car off of someone, we will be grateful for cortisol. However, many of us suffer from stress on a daily basis. Long commutes, work, unhappy jobs, dealing with difficult loved ones, aging, marriage problems, financial problems, and the list goes on and on. And we don't need to exactly fight or flight, but our bodies still release that cortisol. And high levels of cortisol in our blood over long periods of time makes us sick. It also makes us retain belly fat. See, smiling really is the best exercise. I'm doing it right now. In addition, smiling increases your charisma, at least according to the scientists over at Psychology Today. Once I found out that I was going to be giving a SNED talk, I decided to conduct my own research. I reached out over social media and I had 7 brave volunteers. And I asked them to practice smiling while driving in the car and report back to me any observations. This is really high-tech stuff, I tell you. So here's one observation. I was driving to my American Sign Language class again this morning. Today was our final exam. I was slightly anxious about it and traffic was crazy. Slow folks were in the passing lane. I was smiling big. I looked like an idiot. And then this guy was riding my tailgate. He probably did not notice that I was behind an entire line of cars all of whom were equally frustrated by the slow poke up front. He zips out and passes me in the slow lane, thinking there's room to zip back around me. But he quickly realized his mistake. He was trapped. So he squeezes between me and the car in front of me, causing me to have to swerve off the highway to prevent hitting him. Although I'm not exactly proud of my behavior, I was smiling so big when I honked my horn and shot him a bird. It sure is weird to smile while doing all that. It made me laugh hysterically all the way to school. Oh, and by the way, y'all, I made 105 on that exam. Babies have a smiling reflex that begins in utero, and it fades when we turn about 3 months old. And then smiling becomes real business. And it's such a significant milestone that baby books even have a space for parents to record baby's first smile. Smiling was one of the first ways that we learned to communicate. When we see someone smile, we smile too. We learned early on that we could melt everyone's heart with our big drooly grins. And it's impossible not to become goofy when a baby smiles at us. Smiling is a way to connect, even when we don't speak the same verbal language. I'd like to think that smiling is a universal language. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll meet aliens from other planets. And when we greet each other, a smile will be worth 1,000 words of peace, hope, and friendship. But I'll never forget those days. Riding in the black bomb with my sister. I learned a lot of things from her. And all that smiling we did actually did set a lot of things straight for me back in 1986. I can't believe I'm crying during a presentation about smiling. Sorry about that. But I'm just so grateful for the example my big sister set for me. And so it still works for me today. And to answer Amy Cuddy's question, yes, we can fake it until we make it. Well, at least we can smile until we feel a little bit happier. Try it out. The next time you are frustrated in the checkout line, or in traffic, or if you're feeling blue, smile. Smile for a few minutes and see what happens. Smiling is scientifically proven to lower your blood pressure, lower your cortisol level, and it releases those happiness chemicals inside your brain. And watch what happens to the people around you. Smiling is contagious. You will therefore be helping others manage their stress and feel better too. And then they will smile more and impact those around them. And just think, if we keep doing this, we can actually make the whole world a happier place. So just smile. Thank you.
Any questions for Abigail?
Oh, good, thanks.
It was all said, wasn't it? I have something to say. Just to tell about the meditation thing. Abigail, and we've been, working on these talks for a while, and she inspired me to try smiling while I'm meditating. It seems kind of odd, but I just thought it was worth mentioning. What I learned was you can't really grin when you're meditating, but you can do a little Buddha type smile. So it's working for me if anybody wants to try.
That's right, yeah.
Now, I've consulted Abigail on this.
Yeah.
She was supportive. Any questions?
Great.
Oh, here's one.
I just want to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome.
And you know the things, work smile and the world smiles with you.
Yes.
Cry and you cry.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Linda Crittenden is known to most of you as a member of the Sautee Nacoochee community for 30 plus years. Linda, though an art teacher by profession, spent much of her career as art director of Presbyterians Today magazine, and also has been innkeeper along with her husband Mike of the Lumsden Home Place. That's been quite a few years since you all closed. How long? About 10 years or 20? Oh my goodness. Linda is now supposedly retired, but stays busier than ever, gardening, nurturing people in the community, and mentoring in the White County schools. Linda's going to talk about her brother's letters from World War II. I mean her father. Her two brothers are here, by the way. That's my excuse, yeah. Do you want this slide? If you do.
I've been trying Abigail's smiling technique in the grocery store. You should try it. You start smiling at people and they just start smiling right back. It's amazing. Well, when I was growing up, my father had kept a collection of World War II photographs he brought back from New Guinea. There were pictures of soldiers, of native New Guineans, and lots of them with men posing in, with old airplanes. He had been a pilot, as it turned out, and all these guys had been his buddies. There was so much we didn't know. Daddy died of leukemia when he was 42, and like most veterans, he must have had a reluctance to talk about his experiences. Or we as children weren't ready. Either way, the pictures were frozen in time until my aunt found his letter, saved so carefully by my grandmother. The letters, written from 1939 through 1944, describe how it all came about. Young Robert Colgrove, called Robbie by his family, grew up in the 1920s on a tree-lined street in Canandaigua, New York. That's in the Finger Lakes region. He was the fourth of 9 children. He loved tennis and, as he said, anything athletic. When Robbie left home in September of 1939, flying a single-engine fighter plane was not on the horizon. He was off to Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan. His first letter he wrote from Ann Arbor tells of finding rooms with a very kind and considerate elderly lady and getting a square meal at the co-op for 35 cents. Soon after, he asked his mother to send his bicycle. That same September 1939, Germany started their aerial bombing raids on Warsaw, and in that 1 month alone, there were 1,100 sorties. Just 85% of the city was destroyed by. The U.S. Army Air Corps had only 55 enlisted pilots in 1939, and it'd be almost 2 more years before the Army started to really ramp up and create the rank of aviation cadet for pilot candidates. Well, for Robert Colgrove, this was an opportunity of a lifetime. He qualified and signed on almost as soon as the program began. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941, and that year Daddy had spent Christmas at home with his family, and then he left for Alabama in basic training at Maxwell Field outside Montgomery. I sort of love the car. Boot camp and military training for the new recruits was intense and lasted 9 weeks. Classifications for the aviation cadets were navigator, bombardier, and pilot. Robbie received orders to report to Carlstrom Field in Arcadia, Florida. Notice the airplanes on the bottom down there. Carlstrom was home to Riddle Aeronautics Institute, where the Royal Air Force pilots were also trained. Carlstrom apparently had a lot of amenities because Daddy wrote home to say that it was like a country club down there, and asked his mother to please send his tennis racket and 4 cans of blue balls. Aviation cadets were taught to fly in a Stearman 17. It's a single-engine biplane with 2 open cockpits, instructor in the front, the student in the back. On April 1st, 1942, Daddy went up for the first time, and just after a few minutes, the instructor gave him the controls. He admitted that he didn't like it when the instructor put them into a tailspin at 3,000 feet, dropping 1,000 in just a few seconds. But he didn't get sick, and that was a sure way to lose your place and to get washed out. And just 2 weeks later, April 15th, he wrote to his mother, "The most exciting thing that has ever happened to me came on Monday. That was the day I soloed with less than 2 weeks of flying. I got the chance to take the ship up all alone. Landings had been the hardest to learn, but on my first day of soloing, I landed it neatly for 3 times. It was a great feeling." Am I doing that? Yes. For his 22nd birthday in 1942, the family sent him a lot of cards and a gift. It was an electric razor. And he wrote back to say he wondered how they'd been so psychic to think of it and to pick out just the one he wanted. "It whisked the whiskers right off," he said. He thanked them all and added, "You probably realize that I'm just living for flying right now." The principles are simple. There are 3 controls: the stick situated between your knees, rudder pedals under each foot, and the throttle. And that was it. The stick will move in any direction, so if you move it to one side, that side goes down. Move it ahead and the nose goes down, you pull it back and the nose goes up. When we do a loop, we start plenty high, then we push the stick forward to start a drive, faster and faster, until you pull straight back and the loop is started. Upside down, you still can fly the plane as you please. After primary, the cadets went to advanced training. There were 2 categories for pilots, the box pilots they called them, that flew the bombers and the transport planes, and pursuit pilots. Robert Colgrove wanted to be a pursuit pilot, and he went to gunnery school, single engine pursuit training, and formation flying. Formation flying was one of the most important skills a pursuit pilot had to learn. In September, he described the maneuver, "I fly in formation with my instructor in the lead. We do acrobatics such as slow rolls and loops as if we were in one plane. This calls for great coordination to do these in unison. And at night, when the air is perfectly still, we can simply spell out the next maneuver in code by tapping the wings lightly. I suppose you will be inclined to disbelieve this because it does sound a little fantastic. Your loving son, Robbie." And then there was, I've got an extra minute. These were ATs. They called them aviation trainers or basic trainers, and they were a different plane than the fighter plane. That's what they learned with. He also went to gunnery practice, and he said it was fascinating business, emptying 100 rounds toward the target. But when firing the gun, it's hard to keep the wings level. The advanced pilots also practice cross-country flights and night flying, and one of my favorite letters was about night flying. "Dear Mother, night flying is very beautiful, just sitting on the field, watching the planes come through the darkness. To land is the most beautiful. One by one, they float in very quietly and smoothly. Flying at night, everything seems pretty dark except the stars above and the instruments in the ship, visible because of the radium paint. At a couple thousand feet, one can easily make out streets and can even watch the traffic signals as they change from red to green. The roads look like straight white lines, and patches of dark and light denote wooded areas and fields of grain, and rivers look like streams of mercury in the moonlight." Should I wait?
I'm sorry, the picture didn't load.
Okay. It was a night picture. In November of 1942, he had just completed 50 hours in a Bell P-39 Airacobra. It's hard to, anyway, at Dale Mabry Field in Tallahassee when he got his orders. Robbie and his friends shipped out to Australia, and where he eventually joined the 35th Fighter Squadron and the 8th Fighter Group. When they arrived, things went really like a snail's pace. In fact, the unit shifted around to different camps on the eastern side of Australia for almost 5 months. There was plenty of downtime, and a big chunk of that filled with the competitive sports and board games. These guys were really competitive, by the way. In the lull, he wrote, During the day, I play an unusual amount of chess. There are a good number of men who are experts at the game. In fact, the longer they have been here, the better they know how to play. I might say the larger are the stakes at cards, too. It's sort of a sportsman's paradise, for if there is anything else to do, a group of fellows can always get up some kind of a game. There's no lack of entertainment, only lack of work. But right after that, in May, things immediately changed, and work they got, and plenty of it. The unit moved to somewhere in New Guinea. The Allies had gone on the offensive against the enemy, and it was summer of 1943, and the next 7 or 8 months in that area would be like a hornet's nest. So the mail was censored. There were a lot fewer letters, and the information on where the unit was based and what they were doing was kind of hard to figure out. There was no mention of Cyclone's flying circus either. So my curiosity about one of Daddy's pictures led me to find that the commander of the 8th Fighter Group was Lieutenant Colonel Emmett Cyclone Davis. When Davis was stationed in Hawaii, he realized that Pearl Harbor was being attacked, and he drove to the flight line, got a lot of our airplanes off to safety, and then he taxied. Then he went over to the armory, and that's better. We went over to the armory and loaded a plane with 2 machine guns and took off, and was one of only a few pilots who was able to get in the air that day and stage any kind of a defense against the Japanese. Under Davis's command, Cyclone's Flying Circus received 2 Distinguished Unit Awards, and from September 1943 through February 1944, the pilots of the 35th 8th Fighter Group, they destroyed over 60 enemy pilots. They also provided cover for Allied landings, flew long-range attack missions, and escorted numerous bomber squadrons. And so by January of 1944, the 8th was totally involved. So Daddy wrote this letter: "Dear Mother, Dad and all, it was sweet to receive your letter tonight, Mother. The reason for my poor letter writing has been that I have truly been quite busy, fortunately. According to your letter, I'm a little late to be breaking the news of a new award. I intended to warn you, but there wasn't room to mention it in the V-mail." And then that is a V-mail letter. This is the size of a V-mail letter. The Army recognized how valuable communication between the soldiers and the families was for everybody, and the amount of mail was just astounding. And they figured out a way to give the soldiers a special piece of paper to write on, and then that was microfilmed. The microfilm was shipped to the United States and processed, and then these little tiny letters would be delivered to the family, and this is just how big it is. And you have to use a magnifying glass, practically. In January, he also wrote, "Christmas Day, I saw my second combat. This time I had a gun sight. It was a rather big fight. It was exciting, too, because that day I knocked down 1-0 of my first. The squadron got 19 that day, no losses." And then in another letter, "Your Christmas package came in excellent condition, and boy, were those nuts good, fresh as any could be. They were the best that I've had in a long time, and everybody in the tent enjoyed them more than anything else I could have received. So I'm going to ask you to please send a few more nuts when you get a chance. As a matter of fact, I've done my chores well enough to pile up a total of about 120 missions. It represents quite a bit of flying time, but flying is just as thrilling as ever. I get just about as much kick out of it as that first day I soloed in primary. In the last combat, I got 2 more NIP fighters, so the old P-40 now has 3 flags on it. I don't dare show you with this light where they are, but they're there. That's Daddy, and I don't know the other 2 people. For me, the next 2 pictures described a lot. One was an early picture from when Daddy graduated from school in 1942, so sort of innocent, I thought. And the other after his tour in the South Pacific. While overseas, he flew 162 missions, piloting the new twin-engine P-38 in the final months there. When Robbie came back to the States, he had been overseas for a year and a half. He went home to Canandaigua to see his family and to make plans to marry my mother. Then he had a relapse of malaria and was in the hospital for a month. Malaria took a terrible toll on the soldiers who served in the South Pacific, and almost 50% of the ones who served in New Guinea contracted the disease. In all the letters, Daddy always seemed to have such an upbeat attitude. He was positive and enthusiastic about everything he was doing. Not even malaria got a bad rap. Before my aunt gave my daddy's letters, gave them to me, his old photographs are practically meaningless. Through the letters, I've had a wonderful journey of discovery. I had no idea what learning to fly in 1942 was like, or that a person could love it so much. Here was a family-loving hometown boy who went innocently off to college, and by some curious twist of fate, found his passion and then got caught up in world-changing events. But he never missed a beat. As soon as he got home from New Guinea, he was ready to start the next chapter of his life, and he did. 17 years later, he was gone. But my two brothers and I now have the gift of his letters, and finally, the connection that we needed, we'd lost. And we have something to share with the next generations, illustrated with fascinating old black and white photographs. Okay?
Questions for Linda?
Something about an airplane?
Yeah, what did he do after he got out of the Army or the Air Force?
Well, he didn't get out of the Air Force maybe until 1946, I think. He was stationed in Dale Mabry in Tallahassee, Florida, and was the gunnery squadron leader. It was like he was for the whole base, which was a job he was glad to have. He liked it. And he married my mother, and they went to Colorado. And I guess, I don't know exactly, I think it was 46 when he got out. He left. Barbara had asked me the question the other day about did he have to be sent back to New Guinea or go back into the service, but the malaria turned out to be a benefit, because I think he wrote in one letter that he thought that was going to keep him from going off to overseas again.
How he loved the South.
How he
loved the South.
She said how he loved the South. Well, I'll take it. You might wonder how we ended up here. But these letters, from the very beginning, he would write back about the weather. When he got to Alabama, practically one of the first letters said, "The weather is fantastic down here." And then he loved Florida, and he would say he loved Arcadia, and he loved Tallahassee, and actually asked for Tallahassee because he liked it so much. And I think he just, as I was telling Jeff, I think he just was tired of shoveling snow. Anyway, we ended up staying here, we raised the family here.
Linda, what was his profession here?
Oh, here.
Well, what was his profession in the South after the Air Force?
Let's see. Well, his last years, he was an independent insurance agent, and he had his own agency, and it was in Milledgeville.
Were these letters just recently discovered?
Yes, I am so.
Wait just a minute, because I don't think people could all hear the question. She wanted to know if the letters were just recently discovered.
And I just needed that question. I was in Canandaigua visiting my aunt, and she was closing down the family house, and she found the letters that my grandmother had very carefully saved, and she gave them to me. And I brought them home, and it was too much of an emotional experience for me to read them. I just couldn't do it. His early death had kind of been a problem for me. And so I sent them to my brother, my younger brother, and while he was reading them, he made copies. And then he made a notebook for all the siblings and my aunt. And this is a notebook which I'm clinging to. And they're just amazing. And so I did just excerpts from it. But that's a gift. You can see it's a tremendous gift.
Didn't read them right away.
Well, I guess we have time for one more. Yeah, no.
How many children were at home when he passed? And
When he,
when he passed away, how many children were at
right,
home?
right. Well, let's see.
3.
3. Are you talking about my family or his brothers and
There's
sisters?
you and your siblings.
Oh, yes, there's only 3 of us, my 2 brothers and me. Yeah, I was 16, I think John was 12 and Mark was 8, something like that.
So that's you in the picture, that's you.
That's me.
Yeah.
That's right.
And we'll have that one more person there whom I couldn't see, but,
Mine.
oh, mine.
I just wanted you to share the fact that you kept a diary also,
Oh, well.
that information was not.
Well, I can't tell you everything about everything, but there was a little diary. He did give an account in his diary. He was very cheerful and very upbeat all the time. I think it's either to protect his mother or that was just the way he was. But in the diary, he wrote about being shot down and losing the airplane and spending the night on a beach. And the thing I remembered about that was that the mosquitoes were just, it was awful. He didn't complain about getting shot down. The mosquitoes all night. But his people came and picked him up the next day. He was, so it was obviously.
I think that many or most of you have not met Jeff Jones, and so I'm very happy for you all to meet one another today. Jeff is a retired physician, a urology specialist, who now lives in Gainesville with Polly, his wife of 49 years. Long fascinated with the scientific revolution and how it has impacted the way we see our place in the universe, Jeff decided last year to teach a course at the Brenau Leisure Learning Institute, also known as Bully. This experience led him to write an ebook, which will be out soon, entitled Finding Our Home in the Universe.
looking at this video, where is your home in the universe? Not just your address, but the place you are part of and is a part of you. The place where you find meaning and purpose for your life. When I was in the 7th grade, I had this bizarre notion. Science could answer all the deep questions that were forming in my young head. Somehow I knew enough of the realm, if I knew enough in the realm of science, I would have satisfying answers to these big questions. Why am I here? Where am I? What's my purpose in life? Those were heady times in the 1950s when I grew up. Science seemed to be advancing on all fronts to dispel the darkness of ignorance. People began to jet around the world. Antibiotics were slaying diseases that had been the scourge of mankind for ages. There was a promise of unlimited power unleashed from the atom, which would make electricity too cheap to meter. I bet some of you remember that one. Progress in science held out the possibility of the end of poverty and hunger. Science was on the march everywhere. It seemed satisfying in spite of the threat that science wrought in the possibility of nuclear annihilation. Science wasn't just what went on in an isolated lab, but also it was using our senses, our mind, our instruments to push back the great unknown. Mostly it seemed to work. As I progressed through school, this model rarely failed. I could do the math in the science labs, which tested the reality of the world and gave validity to the scientific way of seeing things. I was in hog heaven. Here I was at a very young age, making progress in what had become my unchallenged quest. Things were falling into place. It was wonderful. This worked until I went to medical school, and all of a sudden the neat, concrete formulas and certainty of the outcomes of what I was doing became suspect. I remember to this day as a surgical resident when I turned the respirator off on a premature infant with fatal birth defects that we couldn't begin to correct. Where were the formulas and the math to guide me through this crisis? Science had nothing which even came close to helping. Science had failed and my mental model of life crashed also. What I call the mystery had appeared. The rug had been pulled out from underneath my feet. I had failed. I was 0 for 1. Now I really didn't know what I was looking for. Life went on, and the next event which altered my life was the birth of our daughter. Even knowing something about the process of how babies form, this squishy little girl was something else altogether. There was overwhelming joy and love and tenderness. Underlying this was a profound awe at the sheer mystery of her. Here in my arms was a vast potential for life which no scientific formula or theory could begin to comprehend. This was something way beyond what my meager knowledge of science could ever hope to explain. There were no formulas to explain the wonder of this little girl. The mystery of life caused me to fall flat. My hubris was in full retreat. I needed to make sense of what was happening and retreated to what I had always done before. I studied it to death. It always worked. It seemed the people who had tackled this mysterious realm were fittingly called mystics. I read them all: John of the Cross, the unknown author of The Cloud of Unknowing, Julian of Norwich, and all the rest. I have an entire library full of their thoughts and wisdom. I studied contemplative practices and practiced as a Buddhist for several years. I was trying to penetrate this mystery with the usual tools of prayer, meditation, mindfulness, poetry, art, and so on. It was a brute force, head-down approach which had always seemed to work for me before. Still, the mystery eluded me. I was empty and diseased. It didn't seem like there was any connection to the world I lived in with concrete objects and real people who hurt and bled. It was another dead end. I had failed again, and I was 0 for 2. Then a disruptive revolution occurred. The internet was born, and all of a sudden I had the accumulated wisdom of the ages in my home, aided by another disruptive technology, the computer. At the same time, the great space telescopes and Earth telescopes came into being, along with great strides in another discipline called cosmology. The story of the universe began to unfold. The picture we now have is less than 25 years old, and we are the first generation of humans to be able to appreciate the universe in this way. I thought science had made a comeback. Images like this of the Crab Nebula became available. The Crab is 6,500 light years away. A light year is about 6 trillion miles. It's the product of a star which exploded, destroying itself and everything around it. If there had been planets around this star, they would have been obliterated and vaporized. This explosion is called a supernova, and it was seen on Earth in AD 1054 by Chinese astronomers with their naked eye in daylight. It was that bright. Now this is not a static image, but a dynamic process which in 1054 put out more energy than the entire 100 billion stars of the entire Milky Way galaxy. This is what it looks like about 1,000 years later. And this image, this is called M51. It's a galactic collision occurring about 23 million light years away with another smaller galaxy. Think for a moment what we're looking at. We're looking at two galaxies trillions of miles away with hundreds of billions of stars, and all these are stars also out here in this haze. And everything is in motion. It's all in a gravitational dance. It's awesome. The beautiful Crab Nebula we just saw wouldn't even show up on this image because it's so small. The Crab is about 10 light years across. This galaxy is over 100,000 light years across. All this time I was reading science, trying to find a key to what I'd hoped I'd missed before. Some tidbit of information which would bring all this wonder together in a satisfying, coherent way. I had invested so many years on this path, I was reluctant to give up. It was all I knew how to do. I was like an alcoholic looking for my next drink. Then in the last few years, progress has been made in a field which was previously relegated to philosophy, and that is the field of cosmology. This is the study of the universe, how it started and how it's evolved over time. One thing you must know is that these images are like looking into the past. They're time machines. The speed of light is finite and constant. And there's no way around this in spite of what Star Trek fans might tell you. But this is how these galaxies looked 23 million years ago. The Crab Nebula is how it looked 6,500 years ago. Then what I consider the most important scientific instrument of the 20th century was launched, the Hubble Space Telescope. The Hubble was asked to look at an area of space, and the moon is there just to show you the scale. But all the Earth telescopes had looked at this area and they saw nothing. There were no stars, no galaxies, it was a void. It was blackness. And this is what the Hubble Space Telescope saw. Each dot of light is a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars. There's no individual stars in this picture. Some of these galaxies are the first galaxies in the universe. These little tiny red ones that you see, little that you can barely see, are 13 billion years old. The universe is thought to be about 13.8 billion years. The story is essentially one of the universe appearing from nothing and expanding very rapidly. At first there was nothing we would recognize. Only after it had expanded for a time did energy, matter, and the physics we understand come into being. When you look back at how the Big Bang unfolded, we can understand it back in time to a certain point. And this is important. No matter what field of scientific endeavor you look at, there's always a point beyond which science is silent. Past this point, our knowledge is turned back. It's a place where human thought can't go. There it was again. This mystery had reappeared where I thought there might be certainty. Now it was the bottom of the ninth inning, and I had 2 strikes on me. Rather than strike out again and go 0 for 3, I looked long and hard at this new scientific myth. And it is a myth, really, in the best sense of the word. And this is what I discovered. My idea of the Big Bang was wrong. It was not an explosion like a firecracker, which happened somewhere in space, and we were outside observers watching it. It happened everywhere at once, before there was time, before there was space, before there was matter and energy, before there was a where. There was no differentiation of things, and there was no outside. I couldn't see it because I was developing in it. You were too. It was before consciousness, before sight, before thought. There was truly no thing there. I came from nothing. I was able to make sense of this story if I combined the mindset of the scientist with the mindset of the mystic. They were both looking at reality from different points of view, but they were looking at the same reality. They were complementary, two sides of the same coin. Even though there was nothing, what I call the potential for everything which has come into being or will ever come into being was there. All of Beethoven's symphonies, all of Shakespeare's sonnets, all the DNA sequences of every living thing on every planet throughout the universe, and even creatures that don't have DNA on an unknown planet across the galaxy. This potential was there and is there, waiting to become manifest. It's not separate from what becomes manifest. This potential is still there, and the Big Bang is still happening. Right now is what it looks like here in Sautee, Georgia, right here. This is the Big Bang. This potential, which I called mystery, became me and you and everything else and always will. They're inseparable. They always were, we just didn't know it. There is no other place to go. I know it was a tortuous route that I took, but this is how I came to put the story together in a way which makes deep sense to me. It's a story which combines science with the part of the story on which science is mute. For once I have a story which I can embrace and grow into. It's a story which isn't complete and never will be. It's still unfolding as the universe reveals itself in ever more subtle ways which are full of wonder and awe. I'll end with a quote from Albert Einstein. There are two ways to live your life. One is though nothing is a miracle, and the other is though everything is. This is how I found my place in the universe, and I hope you will find yours too. Thank you.
Questions for Jeff? We already decided you're not allowed to ask a question like, what are those stars made of anyway? If you have those kind, you have to ask them of him in the afterward.
I don't think my mind is big enough to comprehend what you're telling us. Because if Hubble can see it, and it's that old, does that mean it's still there?
Nobody knows. That's part of the mystery of this. When you look back in time, you don't know if any of this stuff is here. You know, and if it is, it's changed because those galaxies are now 20. If you had a God's eye view where you could look at it instantly, it would be 23 million years between that picture and what you look at out your spaceship, window. So you're exactly right. You don't know.
But how could Hubble see it if it might not be there?
Well, it was there when
Y'all hear
Hubble
that?
saw it. When the picture was taken, it was as though it was 23 million years ago, and so it was there then, and Hubble saw it, and that's what it looked like. But you're right, those galaxies are interacting. They may be interacting with something else. They may be totally gone. It's the same thing with our sun. If you think about it, it takes light about 8 minutes to get from the sun to Earth. If the sun was plucked out of the sky and disappeared, you would not know it for 8 minutes. It would still go out, it would still be nice and shining outside. So but you're right, it does sort of blow your mind. Yes? Oh,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Ivy, is that
Yeah. When you showed the galaxies colliding, it struck me that it looked very much like the arms in when we see the eye of a hurricane.
Yes.
Is that the same gravitational force, more or less?
Not exactly, no. I mean, it's a much bigger thing that's happening. And, what forms a hurricane is much different than that. It's not necessarily just gravity. I mean, there's, the weather and winds and things like that are not influencing those galaxies. One of the interesting things I found out fairly recently is that our galaxy, the Milky Way, is colliding with another galaxy right now. They just found this out fairly recently, and has been for several million years, and it will assimilate it. And the Andromeda galaxy will collide with our galaxy in about 5 billion years. So you might want to watch, make sure it's in your will or your real estate.
Anybody else? Okay.
You use the word collide, and I'm just wondering, is it merging or is it colliding? Because colliding sounds like if the two get together, they are in trouble.
No.
Is it colliding or is it merging? In case anyone...
Okay, the question is the galaxy is going to destroy each other by colliding. It's, like two ships crashing into each other, and the answer is no. And the thought is that there's so much distance between stars that when, say, the Andromeda galaxy and our galaxy, the Milky Way, merge in 5 billion years, there will be almost no collisions because they'll just sort of pass right through each other. But the gravitational forces will start swirling around, and there are simulations on the internet you can go to on YouTube which show that. They just sort of swirl around, and they go apart, and then they come back together, and they form a whole different galaxy with a totally different shape over billions of years.
One more? Okay.
How do you define infinity?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's one of those no-no questions.
If I knew that, maybe I could win the Nobel Prize and I wouldn't be here. I'd be in Stockholm. No, I don't know. I mean, when I talked about the potential and doing, when I look back at the cosmology and how the universe began, if you take, I don't want to get too technical, but if you get the equations that we know of physics and you go back and put them back into that, what you come up with is called a singularity. And it's something that doesn't exist. It's infinitely hot, infinitely dense, infinitely everything. But when you start getting those infinites, we don't know what that means. And it really means that we don't have any clue.
Just as an advertisement, Jeff will be teaching his class at Grinnell again this winter, right?
Right, starting in
This
January.
winter. So if you talk to Ann Gillespie about that, she's been taking classes there for a while. She knows all about it. So thank you, Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
Just quickly, before we break up, I'd like to acknowledge the SNED speakers from the past who are here today. And we have several that I've seen, and I'll ask you to stand up, and then if there's somebody I missed, let me know. Bob Bowen is here. Karen Luce. Where's Karen? There she is. Henry and Ann Tipton. Julie Winslet, who asked several questions. That was very helpful. Any other former SNED speakers here? Well, thank you all for being here. Refreshments next door.
So,